Hi, thank you so much for joining us. We know your time's important and we're glad you're here. Some of you had some great questions about our first Chinese match puzzle episode. So in this episode, we're going to answer those questions and discuss additional strategies for more challenging puzzles. These are really great puzzles, and I am so glad that you're using them with your students. Okay, are you ready? Let's get started. Visual Puzzles Episode 3, Chinese Match Puzzles Part 2. In Episode 1, we went over the history and the rules, so we won't take time to do that again, but they are both here for your convenience. If you haven't seen Episode 1, stop, go back, watch Episode 1, and then come back and join us for Part 2. Are you ready? Let's get started. In the first episode, challenges 1 and 2 involved building 4 congruent squares. So you only had 16 toothpicks, so you figured out pretty easily and pretty quickly that those 4 squares would all have to be 1 by 1 squares and that they could not share sides. But these puzzles get a little more challenging. Let's look at challenge 3. You have the same beginning design, but this time you have to create exactly 2 squares by moving exactly 6 toothpicks. So if we want to reason and not just guess, what can we ask students and how can we start? Let's use the same questions that we discussed in the previous episode. What if you did not start with this design? Can you use all of these toothpicks to create exactly 2 squares? And how many ways can you find to do that? Let's get started. The first thing you really want to do is look at how many toothpicks you have and the different sizes of squares that you have. And then look at different combinations. You can only have 2 squares. If you build squares this size, you will not have enough. So you're asking students this and they're exploring, and it will take some time, but eventually they will come up with 2 ways that could happen. If you have these 2 size squares, it's 20 toothpicks. You only have 16, but you can share sides, so 4 toothpicks would have to be shared. Now, students might have to think through this, but you're not going to share an entire side, right? You're going to have to share sides here. And 4 toothpicks would be 2 of these sides would be shared. So that's one option. Another option would be to build these 2 squares. That would take exactly 16 toothpicks, so they would not be able to share sides. So now you have some options. Let's see if any of those options can transform into solutions. Let's look at our first strategy. How can we have these 2 squares and they share 2 sides? Well, there are really 4 options, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. So let's look at each option and see if it works. One way to think about doing this is to think about your finished product. So if you look at the square here, which toothpicks would not move? Well, in that case, only 4 toothpicks are not part of the solution, and you have to move 6. So that is not a solution. Let's look at another option. If we consider this option, which toothpicks would have to be moved? And this is just a good strategy for students to think through, what do you want your outcome to be and what will have to move to make that happen? Well, in this case, there are 6 toothpicks that are not part of the solution. So it doesn't really matter how you move them, but you're going to move those 6. And you have a solution. Fantastic. That's one solution. Let's see if there are others. We'll use this same strategy to look at another option. So we think about what we want, and then we see which toothpicks would have to be moved, which are not already in the right place. And once again, there are 6. So this could also be a solution. Great. We have another one. We have one more option with this strategy. So once again, which toothpicks are not part of our end goal? There are 6, so that will also work. I think it's great to consider that every corner did not work, so students really have to think through which of these options will work and which of them will not, and that's in addition to discovering that they have to share 2 sides and they have to be this size. So that's strategy 1. Now let's look at strategy 2. For strategy 2, we determined that we could build a 3x3 and a 1x1 square, but they could not share sides. And there are really 2 options for that. One is to have the 2 squares, this smaller square outside of the larger square, and the other would be inside. So let's look at both. If you wanted to move and just build a separate square outside, you would have to move all of these toothpicks, and that is 8 pieces. So that is not a solution. But how could we move toothpicks and still have a square inside? It couldn't share any sides, so it would have to be right here. So you can see that these 2 toothpicks would be part of the smaller square. So in this case, you do only have to move 6 toothpicks. 4, 5, and 6. So that is also a solution. Fantastic. These are great challenges for all students, but adding the questions below is really an easy way to differentiate. While everyone will be engaged finding a solution, your students who need more of a challenge will have to use a lot of critical thinking, logical thinking, reasoning to find how many solutions are possible and prove their answer using reasoning. So I hope that you'll try this with your students. I know they will love it. So where can you find these amazing puzzles? These sources were shared in episode 1, but I wanted to share them with you again. I hope you'll have time to explore them. And if you love visual puzzles and games, please visit our website. We have lots of resources for these games at amazingminds.com. Thank you so much for joining us today. We really value your opinion and your thoughts, so much so that we are giving away free prizes. So if you try these puzzles, tell us about it, and you'll be entered for a chance to win. Also, don't forget to hit like and subscribe. We don't want you to miss a single episode of Mind Bending Monday. Have a great week. We look forward to seeing you next Monday.